Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Taryn. I'm one of the assistant deans here at the School of Art at Yale, and this is our first fully remote or online program that we're doing for our admission open house. The school does two main programs every year to engage prospective students and the wider community in learning about our programs. And those are our open house and our open studios program, which generally happens in April. Of course, right now in 2020, we have had the entire campus of Yale closed to visitors because of the pandemic. And so while we hope you are all well and healthy, we're doing everything we can to keep our students safely and responsibly in studio, but that involves not having any visitors on campus. So we regret not being able to welcome you. We'll do our best to tell you everything we can about what we have going on and to answer questions that you have. So just to get started, I'm going to go over some just basic information about our programs within the school, and then we'll move on to applying. You'll also hear from our Director of Student Financial Services, David Blackman, and then we'll go into each program in more detail with faculty and students. So the School of Art at Yale is the smallest professional school at the university. We offer 4 different departments or areas of study, and those are graphic design, painting and printmaking, photography, and sculpture. Almost all these programs are 2 years in length, although the graphic design program does have a 3-year track, which is called the preliminary MFA program. That's really designed for individuals who have a background that it doesn't include formal training in typography and graphic design and things of that nature, but you know, they have other things. Maybe they're writers, they went to our school for architecture, different kinds of backgrounds. So they do more of kind of a packing in undergraduate level training in the first year, and then they move on to their MFA. So that's a little bit about just the 4 programs that we have on offer. Obviously, being a small MFA program within Yale University or a large research university has many benefits to it. To give you a bit of context on how we fit into the larger scale of the university, we currently this year have 100 students enrolled. Normally, the School of Art enrolls about 128 students, but we did allow some students to defer this year and take leaves of absence because of the pandemic. We don't anticipate doing that going forward, but I'll talk a bit about that when we get into the admission cycle. In total, Yale University has over 12,000 students studying between undergraduates in Yale College, as well as professional and graduate students. Graduate students outnumber undergrads at the university. There's almost 7,000 of them, and they study across 14 different schools, professional schools such as drama, architecture, law, medicine, divinity, nursing, the School of the Environment, art, music, to name a few, as well as the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And the students come from all over the world. We also have at the university scholars who are postdocs and post-grad research fellows coming. So there really is an incredibly exciting range of people from all over studying and learning and collaborating here at Yale. The School of Art is located in a kind of a small little 2-block radius on the edge of campus. This is our main building, Green Hall. In here we have all of our administrative offices as well as our gallery, which is 3 floors, and that's where our students mount their thesis shows and group shows, etc. We also have within this building the photo labs, some of the graduate photo studios, as well as the atrium, which is the main hub for the graphic design students, where they all have desk assignments and they work together in a communal workspace and take classes, as well as classrooms. So one interesting thing about the School of Art and Architecture actually is that our 2 professional schools also provide all the undergraduate teaching in Yale College for those disciplines and areas of study, which is pretty different than the other professional schools. So we do have undergrads coming in and out of our building to take classes. Behind Green Hall is 353 Crown Street, and this is a building that houses all of our painting and printmaking studios. We have 42 students usually studying in that department, and so all of those studios are located in this building. There's also a print shop in here as well, a small lab, a finishing shop, just to make stretchers and things like that. This complex is on Edgewood Avenue. This is about a block and a half away from the other two buildings. And the first building you see here is called Ike. This is a flexible space. It can be a gallery, a lecture hall. This is where critical practice, which is a required first year course, meets. And then behind it, the large building with the lights, that is the 36 Edgewood building. And this is where we have our metal and wood shop, as well as graduate studios in sculpture, as well as photography. And there's some classrooms throughout this building as well, a laser cutter area, and yeah, some smart classrooms in general. The MFA requirements for all of our students, regardless of area of study, is to complete 60 total units to get the MFA across the 2-year period, or in some cases 3, that they're in the program. Students complete between 42 and 48 units within their area of study. So we actually have quite a lot of requirements for a grad program, although what you're doing in those, like a lot of the courses you're taking are individual criticism or critique, or we'll get into that. Each individual department will go over their curriculum. But we also have a structure where all of our students take between 15 and 18 additional elective units outside of their course of study, and 2 classes or 6 units of which are to be completed outside of the art school. So in an area that is totally separate from the School of Art. And some of our students take more credits than that outside of the school. We're absolutely here to support the students studying in areas across, you know, the many departments and schools and areas of study within Yale. So the possibilities are pretty vast. Pedagogically, all of our programs, well, let's just start with faculty. All of our departments have a director of graduate studies, or 2. Their painting, for instance, has a co-directorship currently. And then there is a core group of full-time faculty, but many visiting critics who come through the department to teach, whether it's classes, facilitating workshops, or working with students in individual kind of studio visits and criticism, or in final and thesis review. So the painting, photo, and sculpture departments have a weekly critique where the students they have a scheduled crit throughout the course of the semester. You may have 1, you may have several, depending upon the department you're in. But visiting artists and visiting critics, as well as the faculty, can be present within those critiques as like a panel of review. We also generally open the crits to the School of Art community to observe when we are all physically on campus. But each individual department is really responsible for determining what courses are offered every year, and the curriculum can be absolutely responsive to, you know, what the student needs are or what's happening in the world. And most of them also have some classes that are more seminar related for students who want to also study more in the academic side of art practice and design. Critical practice is a required course for all first-year students, and it's taught by our dean, Marta Kuzma, currently. This course is really focused in aesthetics, theory, writing about art, society, culture, etc., and functions with kind of a framework where different speakers and guest faculty come in and lecture and talk with students and work with them, and in some cases even look at their work in that context as well. In addition to programmatic curriculum and classes, as well as faculty that are brought in. The school runs a series of all school workshops, meaning sort of like PAN program. Anyone can take them, and they're meant to be very cross-collaborative, as well as all school visiting artist lecture series that happen throughout the course of the year. Currently, for the academic year of 2020, both spring and now fall, Mick-Elaine Thomas is our presidential fellow, and Mick-Elaine's been teaching a workshop called Artists in the Marketplace, which really helps our students understand many of the nuances to navigating, being in the fine arts market as a practitioner and as an artist when they leave. This is our shop in Edgewood. This is the wood shop. We have wood and metal, as I mentioned, in that building. This is our printmaking lab. This is a lecture hall in Edgewood as well, just to give you kind of a sense of what it looks like. This image is from Barbara Chaser-Boo's public talk, which was last year in 2019 with our Dean Marta Kuzma, as well as Claudia Rankine. We celebrated our 150th anniversary in 2019 as the School of Art, which, fun fact, was the first school at Yale to offer admission to women. Okay, so outside of our bubble within the School of Art, there are so many amazing facilities and collections and things to tap into as a student. We have a variety of galleries and library collections, as well as cross-disciplinary labs. This is the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscripts Library, which you've probably seen or heard of. It's incredible, highly recommend it if you visit campus eventually to come through and see. The walls are made of marble and like sunlight comes through it. It's just such an interesting space. Across the street from Green Hall is Rudolph Hall, which is where the architecture department is. And in that building is the Haas Arts and Architecture Family Library, which is, the collections around graphic design, art, architecture, art history. The art history department is also, which is part of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, is also located within Rudolph Hall. So it's very close. And actually the proximity between all the galleries and such is right there as well. This is the Yale Center for British Art, the UAC, or the Yale University Art Gallery, the CCAM, which is a cross-collaborative hub, is located also right, like half a block away from our main building. And yeah, so that's just a little bit of a look at kind of where we are and very brief, but you can always do some more research on our website, art.yale.edu, or the Yale University website as well. So at this point, we're going to shift focus into preparing your application for admission. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I work as one of my many roles, I facilitate the admission process. And so my office, which is myself and Sarah Cronquist and Emily Kappa, our registrar, we work with prospective students to advise them. And we also we build the applications, we facilitate the application process with the faculty. So we're going to tell you a little bit about just the process and how this year will be different. Our application is live. It's on apply.art.yale.edu. It's very straightforward. You just submit the application form, a portfolio, your statement. You'll have to upload a resume and CV, just so we can see what you've been up to. 3 letters of recommendation and unofficial transcript. So when you put in the application, you can just upload, a student copy or an unofficial copy. If you're invited for an interview, we'll ask you at that time to send an official copy of your transcript. There is a $100 application fee to apply. We generally don't waive this. And this is partially because we have need blind admission. So we don't ever pull any financial aid information until all of the admission decisions are made. So unlike many other schools, we don't take into account what someone's ability to say be a full pay student or what have you. We have no idea when we make the admission decision. It's completely uninfluenced by that information. And then finally, we don't require we don't require a GRE, but if you are a non-native English speaker, especially if you attended an undergraduate program that was not taught in English, chances are you'll have to take a TOEFL or IELTS test, which you can take and send to us. It doesn't necessarily need to reach us by the deadline, but soon after is always the best way to try to get all your supplemental application materials in. So let's talk about some of these pieces of what you'll need. Oh, and one fun fact. The School of Art is its own school, as I mentioned at the beginning, so we are not part of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, although sometimes every year people go to that application and they're looking for a program and can't find it. So the portfolio is really the kind of main event of the application, right? So this is what people spend the majority of their time focusing on as they're preparing to become an applicant to the school. We ask for 16 to 20 images of work. The painting department requires 16 images, and all the other programs you can submit up to 20 images. So the whole idea with this is that you're really going to be selecting work that represents your, what you're most excited about, the work that that's most demonstrative of your practice. It's indicating the current direction that you're going in your studio, and shows us how you work with materiality, how you kind of approach the making aspects of your work. But I think that a lot of times applicants get really torn about that final edit, but really it's part of the process, right? It's part of determining whether you're ready for this level of study, is being able to, have that agency to bring the portfolio to, that 16 to 20 pieces that you feel is really, really indicative of who you are and where you're going. Work should be recent. We generally ask for work that is produced over the course of the past year. We know that with COVID-19, this has caused many people to either just not have access to the production they normally have, or just not otherwise be in a situation that is conducive to high production, right? So we're cool with that. We understand that not everyone will have work that is within the last 12 months. So you can go, in this particular year, you can go a little bit back in time to share the examples of your work, and that's fine. As far as shooting images of your work, it doesn't need to be super professional. We get this question a lot. The committees know that, people are coming to us from a whole range of, means as far as how they can document their work. So there's never a point where we're favoring applicants who have highly professionally shot work. So don't worry about that at all. It's more important that when you document your work, you show it in such a way that would give the committee a sense of what really looking at it would be like in space. And I'll give you an example of that. If you have 3D work, shoot it in the same context of how it would be viewed if it was installed, if you can. If you're working in 2D work, such as painting, we would like to see, the edges of the painting. So just shooting the work head on, but being able to see a little bit of space around it so we kind of see the edges. Don't bring your crop in past the edges, as if we're physically looking at it on a wall. Okay. One of the things that we see happen somewhat often is students or applicants submitting what we call composite images, and that's where you take many different images and you cram them into one slide. And that is not what we want. It's very visually overburdening. It's very hard to see things. I would say this happens a lot in the graphic design area with layouts and such. Like somebody might take 6 or 10 different layouts of a publication and put them all in one slide. So please don't do that. If you have, for instance, a book or some kind of work you want to show that has a sequential element to it, You might consider making a video of yourself kind of going through the layouts, for instance. But if you have in photography, if you have a diptych or you have two images that are meant to be shown side by side, you can photograph them that way, being really clear that it's a diptych. But if it's a, for instance, series of 10 photographs, please shoot each individual one independently or share those files independently. Okay, I think that kind of covers the technicals on actual documentation. Time-based work should be grouped at the end of the portfolio, so we'd like to see the static images first. And the system we use, which is called Slate, it will default the order of your work based on the date that you assign to each piece. So just be aware of that. Sometimes it can frustrate applicants when they go through and kind of sequence the work in a very specific way and then come back and it's in a different order. And that's why that happens, because there is a default setting on that. So you can, you know, slightly hack that if you feel that is necessary. The application deadline is January 5th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. That is Eastern Standard Time. Please just, you know, begin preparing your application. It does take time and concentration, and, you know, asking people for letters. It takes preparation. So make sure you build that in. If you haven't started asking for letters of recommendation, start tomorrow. No, but applicants are notified about preliminary decisions in early February. So the deadline happens, we start our committee review pretty soon afterwards, like within the first week. And the committees are reviewing work, reading your statements, you know, reading your letters, everything. And then we take the applicant pool and we narrow it down to a group that's being invited to interview. And then the rest of the applicant pool are notified at that point if they're not selected for an interview. So that's really the timeline. It happens pretty fast. We will do the interviews in February, in late February, and we generally notify the first round of admits in March. If you're interested in applying to more than one area of study, you may, but you are required to submit everything twice or for every application that you make. We really only recommend this if you're, for instance, definitely working in more than one medium. I think the most common crossover we see is someone whose practice can include both painting and sculpture, but it's really up to you. What we don't recommend is applying to as many programs as possible to potentially increase your chances of admission, because that probably won't be the case. Additionally, sometimes students who are applying to the graphic design program are not that certain as to whether the 2-year or the 3-year program is best for them. In that case, we recommend you apply for the program that you think is a better fit for you based on your own background. And it's possible that the faculty may identify you as a candidate of interest for the other track. And if that happens, we'll just go ahead and we'll notify you and see if you're open to that. So getting to the numbers for admission, because we had students on deferral this year, we're going to be accepting fewer students in most of our programs. So we wanted to be really transparent about this and let everybody know kind of the status of where we are this year. The graphic design program will admit 5 students in the prelim track, and that's the 3-year program. And in the 2-year program, we'll admit 6 students to come in as first-year MFAs. And those students will join both the students who've deferred, as well as this year's prelims, who will be advancing into the first year of the MFA. Painting and printmaking, which normally admits 20 to 21 students, will admit 10 students in fall of 2021. Photography only had 1 student defer in fall of 2020. So we're at, still at 90% capacity of our normal admit pool. We will be offering admission to 9 students in the photo program. And then finally, in sculpture, we'll admit 4 students as we have 7 students on deferment. So that is just the way that it's going to shake out as far as the spots that we're going to have. We definitely recommend that you take great time to prepare for applying to Yale. Even applying one day early is considered applying early. The reason for this, in addition to just making sure that you have everything taken care of and everything's in the right, is just perfectly how you want it as far as all your media, your statement, you've read it carefully, you've edited it. You're not rushing basically and pressuring yourself in that way, is why we really do encourage you to take the time, work on your application through December. But mostly it's important to know that our system can become very overburdened in the final few hours of submission. This happens every year because somehow, no matter what we do, the majority of our applicants apply the day of the deadline. So what'll tend to happen is in the evening on January 5th, in the final few hours, is that you're gonna have a harder time uploading your portfolio pieces, your statement, your CV, your transcript. Anything that's an upload is going to take longer. So the sooner you can get that all into the system, and then maybe you're just replacing one image or you're uploading a new version of your statement, it's going to be a lot easier to make sure that you don't hit those obstacles that we get with just like the basic just web traffic at that time of day. Also, of course, letters of recommendation should be requested with plenty of lead time. Although the application itself closes on January 5th at midnight, we will continue to keep the letters of recommendation portal open, and letters can continue to come in after the deadline, and they always do. We do just recommend that you try to encourage your recommenders to submit as close to the deadline as possible, because once our committees begin reviewing about a week after the deadline, they will review your file with whatever letters you have. So you don't want to be missing somebody if that's the case. Okay, so interviews will take place via Zoom this year for the 2021 cycle, and we'll be conducting the interviews in February as mentioned. When we invite you to interview, you'll be guided to a site where you could basically just pick a time and date. We'll set up everything with you, and then you'll, depending on the program, you'll interview with anywhere from 2 to multiple faculty, and in some cases, students may be there as well. But each individual program will talk a little bit about their process. We will, although we're going to be admitting fewer people this year, we will be making longer wait lists. And so that is so that, not knowing going into next year how many of our deferred students will be coming or planning to enroll, or with what's going to happen given the nature of this very unpredictable scenario we're in, we have decided to just have longer wait lists. And so while admission numbers are lower, I do think that there'll be more opportunity to kind of get into the initial, I guess, the sphere of having some admission status, and we do see students on our wait list every year. If they don't ultimately have an admission offer by the end of the summer, often they reapply successfully in the future. We will not be offering deferment this year. So as mentioned, the School of Art has never practiced deferment before. We made this exception in 2020 only because of the pandemic, and because our students who applied in January of 2020, as well as our continuing students, they applied to grad school before this was all going on. They did not sign up for this. So we did make that one-time decision, but for your own planning in this year, please only consider applying to Yale if you intend to enroll, if you are admitted. I mean, you can also decide not to enroll. You might decide to take an offer from another school. That's all fine. And if you decide not to enroll, you can reapply. But we just won't be extending your admission offer until fall of 22. So just some basic statistics that people like to know about. Yale invites approximately 15 to 20 applicants to interview with the admission committee annually. And this is going to change based on our applicant numbers. It remains to be seen if the school will have around the same amount of applicants this year. I personally believe it will be somewhat lower, and so we'll work out those ratios obviously when that time comes. But it's important to know that the admission committees themselves are made up entirely of faculty. As an administrator, I kind of work to facilitate the application, but I don't make any admission decisions. And the students in most programs are involved, at least in being able to see the review process and see some of who's in the applicant pools, and they can give feedback, but the decisions are ultimately that of the faculty. The School of Art at Yale also extends only the number of admission offers for which we have spots in the program, and that's pretty different than a lot of ways that schools do admission. So, for instance, in photography, we will go out with 9 preliminary offers of admission, and then if one of those 9 people chooses not to enroll or to accept another offer of admission or whatever the case may be, we would then go to the wait list and offer that spot, and then keep kind of going down in that way. Our average admit rate for the first round decisions is usually around 5% annually, but again, that's remains to be seen for this year. I can tell you though that the school in total, all 4 areas of study, plans to put out 36 initial or first round admission decisions in fall of 21. So if you have questions, please, we will do a Q&A after this session, after David Blackman talks about financial aid. We'll also have Q&As in the program breakouts, and you can email us at art.admission@yale.edu. You can call our phones, they're back up and running, and Sarah is answering those calls. Sarah had shared with me that one of the most frequently asked questions that she's getting this year is about people's statements, the statement that you write with your application. And I would say that the portfolio and the statement are, the 2 really main important parts of the pieces that you will craft for your application. We read all of the statements aloud as we're looking at your work in committee. And so we are really interested in knowing, what your work is addressing and what is motivating your practice. So it's only 1 page, it's really short. I think one of the, mistakes, but one of the things I see happen a lot with applicants is that they take up a lot of that statement talking about a long period of their own individual personal life story or history, and that can kind of eclipse the focus on the work. So my advice would be, of course, all of our work is about, comes from ourselves and relates back to our identity in some way, but really figure out if that's the approach you're taking to tie that information about yourself and your life in with the practice. Just think about it as this is, your 1 page of information that you really get to address the committee, and you want to be really focused on what that is. And in general, we are available to answer whatever questions you have. Please do be aware, as I think I mentioned earlier, that our winter recess ends on January 3rd. We're back in the office January 4th, but we're not really in the office, we're at home. So fielding a lot of calls that day before the deadline might be tough. So do, prepare yourself, make a list of questions, call us through December or email us, and we'll do our very best to get you answers. So thank you so much for being here and listening to me talk about admission at the Yale School of Art. I'm excited to move you on to the next section with David Blackman, who will address financial aid and preparing yourselves for that. And then the really exciting part will be getting a chance to hear from our faculty and students in our program breakouts. So thank you so much. We're so excited to review your work and to learn about what you've been up to and see you in our admission pool this year. So have a great day, and I'll pass it on to David.
Hi, I am David Blackman. I am the Director of Student Financial Resources. I oversee everything financial aid, everything sort of money related. So, you know, I'm the person you would go to figure out how to pay for stuff at the end. And so we'll walk through the application process, and, you know, like Karen said, we can answer some questions at the end.
Cool.
So the big question, applying, how do I apply for financial aid? You know, the big application, the one that we rely on the most heavily is the College Board profile, the CSS College Board application. You're going to want to complete this, whether you're domestic, international, no matter what. If you want financial aid, this application has to be completed. If you're a domestic student, or a permanent resident, you are going to have to complete the FAFSA as well. Those two applications need to be in order for us to do any sort of calculation of an award or any sort of you know, figuring out what you may be eligible for. The third thing that we need is 2019 tax returns, W-2s, or income statements if you're not a U.S. resident, or, you know, you haven't filed, you know, a tax return in the United States because you don't live here. We need to verify the income information from the College Board CSS profile, and so that's how we do it. We look at tax returns, we look at income statements, and we compare the data just to make sure everything's accurate and that we're giving you the most accurate and up-to-date award. Requirements and deadlines. So essentially, the College Board CSS profile and FAFSA are both live now. You can log in and complete both right now. Financial information for both your parents and yourself is going to be necessary. So that includes the tax returns, and that includes completing the parental section on the CSS profile. The deadline for that is March 1st. So, you know, admissions decisions are made around that time. And in order to get out an award letter within a timely fashion, if you have other decisions to make, or you're thinking about, you know, what it's going to cost you before our answer deadline, you're going to want to have everything submitted by that date. Need blind admission. So basically, our financial aid review follows the admissions decision. That means that we're not involved in deciding who comes. We're not involved in you know, setting up packages based on you know, who admissions decides they want to be here. We do everything separate. So our awarding process is basically need-based. Once you fill out the applications, I sit and I look at the admissions list, and I go through and I apply the school formula, look at all the data, and apply you know, our standards to each award in the same way. Our goal is to create an equitable and reasonable award for each student, and we look at the same metrics for everyone. That way there's no discrepancy, there's no favoritism. We don't do merit-based awards. We just do everything strictly on a need basis. So the biggest question and the most often asked question is about parental information. So parental information is required. On the CSS profile, when you're filling it out, it's gonna, you know, ask for parental information. You're gonna need to submit this. We don't offer waivers for this. We don't, you know, if you're 35, if you're 50, you know, we don't waive this. If you're married, we don't waive this. If you have children, we don't waive it. It doesn't, if your parents say they're not gonna give you the information, it's not necessarily a reason why we'd waive this information. We look at everyone, you know, in the same manner. And so this is one of those metrics that we need to look at. And so if you're completing the CSS profile, and you're having difficulty getting parental information and you decide, I don't need it, it's okay, I'm just going to submit without it, that's an incomplete application and I'm not going to be able to provide you a financial aid award. So what I always tell people is, if you're having trouble getting the information or you're having trouble completing the parental section of the CSS profile, wait until the admissions process is complete. If you're accepted, then we can talk about options and figure out a way, excuse me, to navigate the missing information. Do not submit a CSS profile without parental information, without talking to me first. It's usually like, oh, well, it's okay. I haven't talked to my mom in a couple months. I don't need to get this. And then it's like, yes, you do. And so in that scenario, you'll end up having to go back and start a new application from scratch. So, I really want to prevent people from doing that. So I'd say, wait until you're accepted, and then we can have a conversation about what options we can, do to mitigate the parental information. As I said before, all our awards are need-based. We look at income, assets for parents and students. We try to make equitable assessments because unfortunately we don't have the resources to fully fund every single student that wants to come in. And if we were just to say, hey, our need-based award is based on what you think you need, everyone would say that they needed everything. So what we do is we try to look and make reasonable assessments based on what's available. And we're very flexible, we're very understanding. And it's not like a hard and fast rule all the time. I'm more than willing to talk to you and review information that you provide that can further elucidate some of the circumstances that may be going on in your life, or things that might have changed since 2019 if that's the tax information you're submitting. So you can always feel free, once you're accepted, to reach out and ask additional questions, or say, hey, this number looks high, or I'm curious why this is this, and then we work through it and try to get you the best award possible, so that you're able to be here and feel comfortable with the financial decision. Scholarship, the maximum scholarship that we offer for our first year students is usually the full cost of tuition in subsequent years. So your second year, and if you're in the graphic design program, which obviously I'm expecting that not everybody here is going to be considering that as well, but we try to increase the awards in the second year and years beyond that. So your first year, the maximum award would be full tuition scholarship. We don't go above that just because we can't afford to, but it's a very generous award. And then in the second year, for a lot of students, there is a little bit more. We don't really disclose our average scholarship just because students then expect that they'll meet the average, but it can vary. Our scholarship number could be full tuition, it could be less than that, it could be nothing in some cases, just from students that have families with a lot of resources. So all of that is something that I stress, we will discuss and we can go over in detail once you're accepted and once I've reviewed your information, in detail.
Thank you so much, David. That was really helpful.
And I will say that,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I know I get a lot of requests for people to review information or look at information or talk about scenarios before they're accepted. And unfortunately, I just don't have the time to talk or have conversations or speculate about what anyone's award might be or what scenarios might change what. So, if you are curious about, what your award might be, make sure that you complete everything. And then once you're admitted, then we can have that conversation. And it unfortunately just cannot happen just given the the number of applicants that we have, it just cannot happen before, that discussion cannot happen before you're accepted formally.
Thanks, David. And I also should just mention, this is available on our website, but I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but generally, you know, our tuition increases slightly annually. Currently it's 43,000 some, no, you tell us.
It's 41. It's 41,240, I believe.
Yes, and then there's like, yes, okay, so that's the tuition. And then there's also cost of living budget and expenses that we estimate. And so when David says that the highest need individuals might get up to full tuition, it's important to know that then there's still the cost of living and other costs of attendance that come into play, and that is where there can be loans or there's other financial aid that we can pull together. David works hard to pull together to help meet that need or the unmet need. So that is to say that if you get a scholarship, there can still be costs associated with attendance. And I think we will post we usually post our cost of attendance for the following academic year around February. That's when our budget is usually, is that true, David?
I would say it's more, the first time people actually see it is probably on the award letter.
Okay, on the award letter, so March.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, does anybody have questions for David or I? If you do, you can put them in the chat. I can't unfortunately see the chat.
There were some questions for you all.
Okay.
Some very good ones too.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we should take a couple of those. Martin, are you and the faculty okay with that?
Yes, I think it's a good idea to do that while we're close
Okay.
to this topic.
Cool.
So I'm gonna read some from let's look at some of the financial aid questions that we had for David. Does the number of dependents impact the financial aid decision? Could you talk about that, David, with children, etc.?
So yes and no. So it doesn't affect, unfortunately, the amount of scholarship that we would be able to offer a student, but it would affect their living expense budget. So how we estimate what your total cost would be to attend school as well as live and support a family in New Haven during the academic year would vary greatly. So in the first year, since we're not giving scholarship that's above tuition, it's not really going to change anything. And so like we don't unfortunately give more tuition or more scholarship to students because they have children. We give it based on the calculated need, and that calculated need kind of touches, having dependents, but unfortunately, it's not really something that bears out like you're gonna be fully supported because you have children, if that makes sense.
That's great. And I have some more financial aid questions for you, David. The question was, is there a way to indicate for the parental info section if your parents are deceased?
Yes, before you get to the parental information section on the CSS profile, they ask, what is your parent's status? And like you can say divorced, remarried, and deceased. And so like deceased, once you hit the deceased option, it actually skips all the parental questions.
And there's one more for parental info. The question was, for the FAFSA, do you need to put in your parental info?
No.
Great. Okay, and then one last question that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. Are financial circumstances brought on by the pandemic also considered for this upcoming financial aid cycle?
Yes. Yes, they are. So everything has to be documented, and that's always like the way that I can make an adjustment. So I know we've had a number of students who have had income, or I won't say students, but more parents or more families that have had income losses because of, you know, a family member that got laid off, or they've had to dip into savings to, you know, pay off medical expenses or deal with some sort of hardship that has happened because of the pandemic. Those are things that I can take into account because they can be documented. Um, the harder things, and I know this applies more towards artists, is like, oh, well, I couldn't sell as much work because of the pandemic. Like that is something that's unfortunately not really, it's harder to assess. Usually, like I said, I look at tax returns, I look at income statements. So if I can see a drop off in income from 2019 to 2020's tax returns, then I can take that into account. But if it's not something that you can document, it's a little bit harder, and we'll have to have a conversation about that once you're admitted.
And I just had one more financial aid question come in. I'm just sorry, I have to scroll in my document. Oh, this is a good one. If your financial circumstances change while you're in school in the program, can you apply again the second year?
Yes, yes, you absolutely can. The thing to keep in mind is that generally, generally student circumstances, like changes that occur are, um, it's very, again, it's about documenting it. So when we calculate a student coming into school, we don't look at income for the most part because we expect that while they're here, they're not going to be working and making the same level of income as they would be when they're not enrolled full time in a program as vigorous as this. So if a student says, "Oh, well, my income dropped off," unfortunately, it's not really going to have that much of an impact. And then there's also, you have to think about like assets. So if a student has an asset, let's say you have $50,000 in the bank, if you spend that $50,000 and then come back, unfortunately, it's not something, one of those things where it's like, oh, well, now the school's going to make up because that asset is gone. We have to think about how, you know, why this asset is gone. Were there medical expenses that had to be paid or something that happened that, you know, really made this, you know, a reasonable expenditure or a liquidation? Generally, what changes from year to year that makes the biggest change is when a parent either retires or loses their income, or something sadly catastrophic happens. And so I don't expect that. I don't want students to, you know, expect, oh, well, I'm not going to be working in my second year, so I'm going to get this big change in financial aid, because that generally doesn't happen because we already build it in for your first year.
Thank you, David.
David, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How close are these, like these guidelines, to other schools? Are they fairly similar to guidelines for other schools?
Um, It depends. It honestly, it depends. So we mirror a lot of schools here at Yale, but then at the same time, there are a lot of schools here at Yale that do vastly different things. We also, um, I think we mirror a lot of other, um, I would say, Ivy League schools in terms of the way that we look at income and assets, and the way that we consider parent information, which is um, becoming more of a thing at the graduate level. So, you know, I think, you know, that's probably the biggest difference between us and other schools is looking at parental information, but it's becoming more prevalent, especially for, you know, graduate programs that, you know, aren't funded by like a state or like tax dollars and things like that. So, you know, we rely on our endowment and private funding. So it's a little bit different.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David.